What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the first episode of Hutch Coming in Clutch. I'm your host, Hutchinson Brown. Today we've got a fantastic show. We've got 4 weeks until March 12th. What is March 12th? March 12th is free agency. That's where free agency starts. That's when we'll be getting all the free agency signings. We'll know all that news. So these 4 episodes that I have, I'm going to be quickly recapping the 2024 to 25 NFL fantasy football season, talk about some players, what they did this year, talk about the teams as a whole, and also looking towards the future for individual players, talk about some next year value, dynasty value, just a whole quick recap of the 2024 season. Today we're going through 8 different NFL teams, 2 different divisions, the AFC North and the AFC South. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's show. So before we get into the divisional reviews, I want to play a little game. We're going to play a little game today. We're going to do that most shows. And today's game is going to be called Debating the Public. And we're going to bring this back a lot of times, which is where I put out a Twitter poll. And I got some answers, got some feedback on it, got the answers from the public, and I'm going to debate you guys. If I think you're right, I'll just agree with you and tell y'all why. But if I disagree with the public, I'm also going to explain that. So today's poll, we're doing a little bit of free agency preview at the same time here. We're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, recapping the season and doing some free agency preview. Who is the most interesting free agent wide receiver? It's not a loaded class at free agency, but there are a few interesting names. So I wanted to see who the public thought the most interesting name out there was. And the 4 options I put out there, it was the clear 4 best wide receivers of the free agency class. It was T. Higgins, Stephon Diggs, Chris Godwin, and Keenan Allen. And with an astounding 75.1% of the votes, I think you can guess it, T. Higgins won. And I agree with the public here that T. Higgins is the most intriguing free agent wide receiver. He has had multiple top 12 performances in fantasy points per game when you look at PPR scoring in his career. And this past year, he had a career high at 18.5 PPR points per game. That would have put him around wide receiver 5 in fantasy points per game. Had a monstrous season, especially in that second half when Joe Burrow and this offense were really, really clicking. T. Higgins was healthy, and he was monstrous for fantasy. I think T. Higgins is the most interesting fantasy, or not the most, just the most interesting wide receiver in general for free agency because he can change a franchise. I really think he can because if you put him on offense with a young quarterback, I'm talking about the Patriots with Drake May, Bryce Young and the Panthers, or maybe add him to Terry McLaurin with Jaden Daniels. If you add him to a franchise with a young quarterback, that can dramatically change this quarterback trajectory. Or if you put him in an established offense that just needs a wide receiver, like maybe the Chargers, or maybe keep him on the Bengals, this could elevate the offense or keep them at the level that they were at before. And that would be absolutely phenomenal. So T. Higgins can dramatically change the direction of your franchise and the direction of your offense. I don't think the rest of these guys can really do that. Chris Godwin, potentially. It depends on how he comes back from his injuries. But Stephon Diggs and Keenan Allen are past the prime of their career. Stephon Diggs is also returning from a major injury. So I think T. Higgins is the clear, unanimous, most interesting wide receiver in free agency. Overall, though, when it comes to where he's going to go, I think that's not very interesting. I do think he's going to end up staying in Cincinnati. This seems like the easy choice just because Jamar Chase's agent is now also T. Higgins' agent. I think they want to work a deal out. So I think they're going to do everything they can to do so. Now, let's jump into the real meat and potatoes of today's show, the AFC North and AFC South review. We're going to start with the AFC North, and we're going to start with the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens finished 12-5 this year. They lost in the divisional round to the Buffalo Bills, so their playoff hopes ended up falling just short. Mark Andrews, we're looking at you. Unfortunately, that drop and that fumble were costly in the fourth quarter. But we're going to start here talking about Lamar Jackson's fantasy season. He finishes the quarterback 1 or quarterback 2, depending on your scoring. Josh Allen was also up there. He was arguably the MVP of this season. He put up some absolutely monstrous numbers. It was his first season where he eclipsed 3,800 passing yards. He eclipsed 4,000 passing yards this year, and he feel like he elevated his game to a whole new level. This passing offense was elite. He also ran the football at an elite level. He's in the prime of his career age-wise. He's just a couple years under 30, and when you look at quarterbacks, that's around the prime age. He is going to be a monster for fantasy for years to come. He has been for a while now when he's been healthy. So don't overthink it next year with him. Draft him as a top-tier quarterback. I didn't want to spend too much time on him because he's easy. You draft him as a top 3 quarterback in fantasy, and you don't think twice. Now, let's move on to the running back position for the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to start with Derrick Henry. He was a top 5 running back in PPR this year, drafted more as a borderline RB1. So you got a nice value there on Derrick Henry if you did select him. He averaged 5.91 yards per carry. That was a career high for him. 1,921 rushing yards, the second highest mark in terms of yardage of his career. An interesting stat with him, he led the NFL in rushing yards over expected. First time in his career he's ever done that, at 1.77 yards over expected. Now, here's the thing with Derrick Henry. He was incredibly efficient on the ground, but the problem is he didn't get receiving work. So as a result, he was very dependent on touchdowns. Derrick Henry had 4 games this year where he didn't score a touchdown. And in those games, it was actually a 4 games straight from weeks 12 through 16. There was a bye week in there as well. He averaged 14.17 points per game in those contests. Now, that's not bad. But we're talking about Derrick Henry as a top 5 running back. You expect him to be an RB1 on your team. You're looking at 14.17 fantasy points per game. That's not where you wanted to be. So without a touchdown, he was meh. He was just mediocre. So he was touchdown dependent. But the problem was this Ravens offense was very good and got him in the red zone very often. So for me, looking at Derrick Henry's future, next year, I think I'm still going to be invested in him as an RB1. It depends on his ADP, though. If we're drafting him as a top 5 running back, top 6 running back, I'm most likely going to be out. Because in order to draft Derrick Henry at his age that he's at, he's entering his age 31 season, I'm going to need a discount because of that age. I'm going to need that discount baked in. If that discount of age risk is baked in, I'm willing to draft Derrick Henry. If he's going as like the RB 10 to 12 or maybe even later than that, people are going to be really scared of that age cliff. I'm all right drafting Derrick Henry because that means he's going to be going in the back of the second or early third round. If you're telling me I can get Derrick Henry as my second running back or my first running back in the second or third round, I'm going to be ecstatic about that. And another thing on this backfield too, I want you to keep an eye on Keaton Mitchell. I want you to keep an eye on him. Justice Hill's not a free agent. He's going to be on this team another year. His contract ends next season. But Keaton Mitchell is a really interesting player. I loved him coming out of college as a prospect. I thought he was really intriguing. He went as an undrafted free agent to the Baltimore Ravens, started his career on IR, but then the end of his rookie season, we all remember, at least some of us remember, he had a phenomenal end of the season. Not a ton of volume because there were other guys in the mix, but the touches he did get, he was electric with the football in his hands. He was so explosive, one of the most efficient running backs in football when you look at explosive plays made, when you look at breakaway run rate, when you look at yards per carry, when you look at yards after contact per attempt. Keaton Mitchell was up there among the best in his rookie season just a year ago. And then this year, he unfortunately, or actually at the end of last year, he had that ACL tear that kept him out most of this season. He didn't do much this year when he came back, just good recovering from that ACL. But coming back next year, as the backup to Derrick Henry, or at least this, maybe the third or second back, if he's able to work over Justice Hill, the veteran, he could do some things. He only needs a few touches, and he can be really explosive. So I'm not going to say, like, go out and buy him, go spend up on him, go redraft him. I'm not going to say any of that, but keep an eye on him at least. He's someone worth monitoring, especially, Henry's getting older. If he were to go down, Keaton Mitchell's value is going to skyrocket. So keep an eye on him. Now, let's talk about the receiving game for the Baltimore Ravens. Zay Flowers, borderline a top 24 wide receiver this year in fantasy football. He had 6 different games outside the top 48 wide receiver, but 5 games as a top 15 wide receiver. He was really inconsistent, even though he was the clear number 1 target for Baltimore, because this team, they passed the ball fine. Lamar Jackson threw for 4,000 plus passing yards. It was just that they prefer to run the football. And when they were winning games, they were running the football. And they could do that a lot with Derrick Henry in the second half of games because by the time the second half comes, that defense is tired, that defense is torn up, and Derrick Henry just rips them apart in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter. So the Ravens just weren't passing a ton in the second half, and they were, one of the league-leading teams in terms of pass rate, and that's on the negative side. They were right next to Philadelphia in terms of least highest pass rate in the NFL this year and least highest pass rate in the second half of games as well this year. So that's the story of Zay Flowers, man. He gets the volume when the team needs the pass, and when he does, he's great. But the volume isn't always there because this passing pie isn't always that big. And I think that's going to be the story for him for the rest of his career, at least the next couple of years in Baltimore. So, unfortunately, I probably won't get a lot of him because I just don't see the upside. He's probably going to be drafted as around wide receiver 24 to 30 range. He's probably going to be valued around there, and that's where he'll finish. And that's not bad. It's just that when I'm drafting the middle rounds, I want upside. And Zay Flowers, due to the situation he's in, just doesn't present that elite upside. So as a result, I'm likely going to be out because he's not a touchdown guy. He's dependent on catches and yards. And the problem is this offense doesn't always provide that. So just be cautious with drafting Zay Flowers. Don't take him too high. If he falls in the wide receiver 30 to 40 range, absolutely take him. But if he's still in that wide receiver 2 range, I'm likely going to be hesitant. Now, let's talk about the last Raven, Mark Andrews. He was a borderline top 5-10 this year, but didn't really feel like it. You know, he caught 6 passes in his first 4 games, and everyone's freaking out about dropping him. I was, okay with that idea, but it was just crazy. That situation with Kelsey and Andrews, too, it was a wild situation there for the beginning of the season. But then Andrews was able to come back together after that car crash. The first 4 weeks starting a little slow, but then he came back. And after his first 4 weeks, it felt great, but reality, it wasn't. He had a 17-game pace of only 64 catches and not even 800 yards. Now, that's not great. It's just the fact that he scored 11 touchdowns. He scored a monstrous amount of touchdowns, especially in that second half, that brought you to fantasy relevance with Mark Andrews. And I'm not saying he can't do that again next year. It's just that you're dependent on it. So I'm not drafting him in the same tier as George Kittle, Shane McBride, or Brock Bowers. Like, he cannot be in that tier. He is a completely touchdown-dependent play, which means he has to be in the middle rounds if I were to consider taking him. But at this point, honestly, with where tight end's at, I want one of the best guys. So Kittle, McBride, Bowers, likely going to be my targets at tight end, while Mark Andrews in the middle rounds, I'm probably going to be taking some nice wide receivers or running backs that I like. Now, that's it for that team. Or actually, one more thing. Keep an eye on Isaiah Likely. I don't think he's going to be relevant if Mark Andrews is still on this team. But just at least keep an eye on him. He has shown to be talented and has shown to have some production when Mark Andrews is gone. So if Mark Andrews were to leave this team, which has been rumored, I don't think it's going to happen, but it has been rumored, Isaiah Likely will definitely jump into the top 12 tight end conversation for sure. Now let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. They also finished 12-5, lost in the wild card round to Baltimore. Russell Wilson versus Justin Fields. Let's talk about how that played out this year. Neither looked terrible, but neither are future guys for a franchise. Like, it's very clear neither are the future of any franchises. Justin Fields has been given a lot of chances. Russell Wilson's not in the prime of his career anymore. I just don't think either of these guys are the future. I see Pittsburgh keeping Fields and Wilson getting a lot of attention in free agency. He was really solid for Pittsburgh for a stretch, so I think he's going to get a lot of attention. And as a result, the Steelers, I think, are going to be stuck with Justin Fields as a bridge quarterback, or they might add Jameis Winston or a Kirk Cousins if he's available, or an Aaron Rodgers if he becomes available too. So I could see that happening as well. But Fields and Russ are both intriguing for fantasy depending on where they go. Russ is a gunner. He's willing to sling it downfield. Justin Fields can run. But neither of them are like QB1 options. Both would be QB2 interesting options. Now, let's move to the running back position. Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. I think, the thing is, coming into this season, the Steelers basically gave Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren one more year because they're both reaching the end of their rookie contracts, and they probably just looked at them both and said, hey, one of you is going to play better. And that's who we're going to give the contract to. Like, it felt that's what was the vibe here in Pittsburgh. And to be honest, I think Najee Harris outplayed Jaylen Warren this year. And it's not Jaylen Warren's fault. He just got injured. He just got injured a ton of times, and he was off the field a lot. And as a result, Najee was able to take advantage, and he ran hard. I was very impressed by Najee Harris this year in the way he was able to run. He ran very, very hard. It wasn't always efficient, but he tried everything he can for this offense. He did everything he can. I think he's going to get re-signed. I think Jaylen Warren's going to be moving on, going somewhere else. But yeah, with this backfield is Najee Harris is a mid RB2. He's a mediocre RB2. Will get a lot of rushing volume, some receiving volume. Jaylen Warren is explosive and has the big play ability, and depending on where he goes, he could be a really relevant option. And I think after a down year, he'll be a value. I liked him a lot last year in his late rounds cost, and I think this year he'll be even more declined, especially if he goes to an ambiguous backfield. I think he'll be really, really cheap. I'm going to be investing in Jaylen Warren for sure. Now let's move on to the receiving game of the Pittsburgh Steelers. George Pickens. With Justin Fields, it did not work. Like, it's just that connection didn't really work. It wasn't really there. But with Russell Wilson, it was phenomenal. In week 7 through 13, before George Pickens' injury, Pickens was on a nearly 1,200-yard, 8-touchdown pace, 16.8 yards per catch. Phenomenal. And the deep ball, phenomenal, making those big plays. We need a gunslinger. If we want Pickens to succeed, we need a guy who's willing to chuck the ball downfield. If we get a conservative veteran quarterback or a rookie quarterback, I'm not going to be very excited about George Pickens. But if we get a gunslinger, someone who's willing to chuck it downfield, George Pickens is someone I will be in on. But adding on to that, his attitude is a legit problem. If we don't get a gunslinger, he's going to have an attitude because we're going to have a guy that's not throwing to him downfield, and he's going to get mad. And he's going to start punching people. He's going to start getting himself ejected out of games potentially. He's going to start getting fined. He's going to start potentially getting suspended if he does some stupid stuff, which he has shown he's willing to do. The attitude is a legit problem. There are not many players where I will say the attitude is a problem, but for him, it is one because he just mentally blocks himself out of games if he's not getting the ball. And you see when he's mad, he's usually not having a good game. So the attitude is a legit problem. You have to watch out for him. But if he gets a gunslinger, he might be all right. Now, moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals. And notice, I am running through this relatively quickly. I wanted to, these shows, I don't want to be too long for you guys. I don't want to hold you guys here forever. And I also have a lot of teams to get through. So I am running relatively through quickly. This is supposed to be, a quick, nice recap of the season, give you some main points here and there. Not like a full, crazy detailed analysis because, unfortunately, we only have 4 weeks. So I just wanted to mention that as we continue to go through this show. But let's talk about the Bengals. 9-8, missed the playoffs. They won most of the second half of their games. Joe Burrow led them on a major comeback, and it wasn't enough. They fell just short of the playoffs. Joe Burrow, he was a top 5 quarterback this year, 4,918 yards, 43 touchdowns, both led the NFL. 8-game stretch of 3+ touchdowns. 8 consecutive games of 3+ touchdowns. That is one of the largest stretches of 3+ touchdowns of all time. I think the record was 10 or 9 from what I saw. Joe Burrow was just behind the record holder. Now, let's talk about Joe Burrow's future. For next year specifically, I think he's going to be overvalued. Everyone was talking about Joe Burrow, comeback player of the year. He carried this team on his back. He threw for almost 5,000 yards, 40+ touchdowns. Here's the thing. This year was the highest touchdown percentage of his career, highest completion percentage of his career, and the most pass attempts of his career. He literally had to carry this team on his back, and he did a phenomenal job doing it. But I think the efficiency metrics are just so high. They're just too high. I think they're going to come down next year. And as a result, we're going to see most likely a QB 6-9 finish. That's not bad, but he's probably going to be drafted inside the top 5 next year. And I'm not saying he's definitely not worth that price. He could absolutely put up these numbers. It's just you're dependent on the high touchdown percentage, the really high efficiency that he doesn't always put up. We've seen seasons where Joe Burrow's finished as a top 5 quarterback. We've seen him finish as a low-end QB1. It's just dependent on how efficient he is at throwing touchdowns. Some seasons he's got it, some seasons he's not. And given the fact that this was a career-high, crazy outlier kind of season, I'm expecting a dip next year, a dip back to the median, which is probably going to be more like 35 touchdowns, 30-ish touchdowns. And as a result, he's not going to give you the quarterback production you want because he doesn't run the football, and he's dependent on those passing touchdowns. So if you're drafting him as a top 5 quarterback, I think you're going to be disappointed next year, unfortunately. Now let's move on to Chase Brown. He was a fringe RB1. He was fantastic for fantasy, but he was okay in real life. 6 of his last 8 games, he went for 19+ PPR fantasy points. But he was overall in the season, he was outside the top 35. And even in the second half of the season, if you look at his last 8 games, you see similar numbers. He was outside the top 35 in breakaway run rate, outside the top 35 in yards after contact per attempt, and he was top 15 in rush attempts this year, but outside the top 20 in runs that went at 10+ yards. He did what the Bengals asked him to do, and he didn't add much more. He wasn't able to create a ton of yards. He wasn't able to create big plays, create massive opportunities for this team. He was able to do what he was asked, and that's not bad. It's just with a strong running back class coming up in the NFL draft with a few interesting free agent names out there, there's going to be some competition at this backfield. I don't think Chase Brown gets out of this empty-handed. Not empty-handed, sorry. I don't think he gets out of this scot-free. That was the wrong phrase. He was a 5th-round pick, like a day 3 pick, and he had a solid year this year towards the end of the season because of a lot of volume. I just don't see it. I don't see this repeating. I don't see this being a normal thing for him. I think we're going to see potentially a game ender kind of running back added, like a Travion Henderson, Amari Hampton kind of back added to this team, Ashton Genty level. I think we could see that kind of back added to the team. We could also see like a complimentary back, and Chase Brown is still relevant for fantasy. But RB1 numbers for Chase Brown, I don't think we're going to see that ever again. I really do not. So don't expect this as the regular. If you can sell him to a person that believes that he's going to be the workhorse back for the Bengals next year, please do so. Now, let's talk about Jamar Chase. He was triple crowned wide receiver 1 overall. I'm going to make this simple and quick because I have to move through other things, and Jamar Chase is a very simple player to analyze. Draft him highly. Be confident in it. I mean, as simple as that. I think Joe Burrow is going to have a regression year next year, but I don't think that impacts Jamar Chase too much. He's probably going to be a top 5 wide receiver still because throughout Joe Burrow's entire career that he's played with Jamar Chase has continuously been a top 6 wide receiver most years. T. Higgins, we discussed him already, and the rest of this offense is not really worth talking about. They might add a tight end in the draft. This tight end class is very strong, so don't be surprised by that, but we don't know who that is, so we can't talk about them now. Let's move on to the last team in the AFC North, the Cleveland Browns. 3-14, terrible team, terrible franchise, terrible situation. They are one of the worst run franchises in the NFL right now. Let's start with the quarterback position. Deshaun Watson, Jameis Winston, Dorian Thompson-Robinson. It's over for Deshaun Watson. It's over. I think we're going to see a different start for the Cleveland Browns next year. I don't think it's going to be Jameis. I don't know who it's going to be, honestly. It's going to be one of these free agent veterans, I think, though. I think the Browns are going to bring in somebody just to be a bridge, just to be somebody and be a bridge quarterback. Or maybe they draft somebody, but I don't think they have the situation where they would be willing to draft somebody right now. I think they're going to be bringing a veteran, trying to build up their team before they bring in a rookie. Now, moving to the running back position, Nick Chubb is a free agent. I think he's going to be gone. I think the Browns last year restructured his contract, and they made it feel like when they restructured it to end this year, they were like, this is the last year, buddy. This is the last year for you. One more year with Cleveland, and then you're done. I think he's going to move on, and I don't think Jerome Ford's going to be the starter either. I think they're going to bring in a running back. So any running back on the Cleveland Browns right now, I'm not super intrigued by for fantasy for the future because Nick Chubb did not look good last year when he played, unfortunately. I miss Nick Chubb already, the primetime Nick Chubb. It's just not there. And then Jerome Ford is an okay back. I don't think he's going to get a starting opportunity, so as a result, I'm just not intrigued. Now let's talk about the most intriguing player on this team probably for fantasy purposes, Jerry Jeudy. 1,200 plus receiving yards last year, had a massive breakout year, showed everybody why he was a first-round pick. Do we believe this is going to happen next year? Do we believe he's actually a really good wide receiver? Let's talk about it. With Jameis Winston, he was the league leader in receiving yards when Jameis Winston was the quarterback. The pace that he was on was like a 1,600 plus yard pace, I believe. The last time I checked, it was like a 1,600, 1,700 yard pace with Jameis Winston as the quarterback. He had a 200 plus yard performance. He dominated in a game with a 200 plus yard performance. He looked great. He got open. He did things with the ball in his hands too. I thought he looked really good. He looked better than he ever did in Denver to me. He looked like a better wide receiver. He looked like he actually changed, made some things happen, and grew as a player. I don't know how Cleveland did that to him, but they did it to him. He looked like a really, really good player. Now for me, for him next year and for his future, it all depends on the quarterback. Who is the quarterback for this team? If we have a shy rookie quarterback, someone that's not a gunslinger, I don't know how interested I'm going to be. But if we have another gunslinger, someone who's willing to chuck it downfield, an experienced player, I'm willing to draft Jerry Jeudy. And then also it's going to depend on ADP. If you're drafting him in a place where you don't have much risk baked in, it's kind of just like if he doesn't break out, you're going to be disappointed. Like, I'm not willing to draft him. I need that discount baked in if I'm going to be drafting Jerry Jeudy. Now, for the rest of this receiving room, keep an eye on Cedric Tillman. Obviously, I think he had some really good flashes. He's a young player, so keep an eye on him, see what Cleveland does with the rest of their receiving core. And then David Njoku as well. I finished with the tight end 11 this year. Didn't feel like it. He disappeared most of the season. But with Jameis Winston, he was awesome. I mean, he was a great tight end. I mean, it was similar to how he broke out with Joe Flacco last year. But when you had the good quarterback, David Njoku was phenomenal. But with David Njoku, again, all depends on the quarterback situation. If you have a guy that's experienced and a good quarterback, David Njoku could be a really good fantasy tight end. He's got the athleticism, he's got the ability, he's got the strength, he's got all the tools. He just needs a quarterback that can get him the football. And now, next, we're going to jump in to the AFC South. We're going to start with the Houston Texans. They finished 10-7 this year, lost in the divisional round to Kansas City in the playoffs. Let's talk about C.J. Stroud, man. Two times, C.J. Stroud finished as a top 12 quarterback on the week this season. Twice. That's it. And people are going to argue, the receiving core is bad. It's just a weird year for the Texans. There was a lot of inconsistency. There was injuries all over the place. I think that was definitely part of the problem for sure. But there were some parts of CJ Stroud that were responsible for this. This was not a good year for CJ Stroud. This was a step back from his rookie year. When you look at his pressure to sack ratio, it went up multiple percentage points, and it looks like even more dramatic of an increase on film. He consistently held onto the ball way too long. When pressure came in his face, he stood still in the pocket, and he wasn't able to make a decision with the football. He consistently took unnecessary sacks, put his team in negative situations, and as a result, got a lot of punts, got a lot of time on the bench. Will he bounce back? I think he's got better days ahead for sure. I think he's a really good quarterback, a really solid quarterback that has better days ahead than this. I think his receiving core, if his receiving core is healthy, if he has some guys around him, he can make good plays. But he can't continue to play the way he played this year, or else we're not going to see him step in that elite category like we wanted to. Like the way he played this year was not good. He needs to be better than this. And I think he can, though. I think we can get back to where he was in his rookie season and potentially better than that. So let's move on to Joe Mixon. He was a top 5 running back in points per game. Just so capable. He's all that Houston needed. They needed a capable running back that was athletic, that can make plays. That's all they needed, and he was just so capable, so sturdy. Now, let's talk about his efficiency in the two halves of the season, because there were two stories for Joe Mixon. The efficiency was significantly decreased in the second half. In the first half of the season, he was monstrous. Those first 11 weeks, absolutely monstrous. He was amazing when he was healthy. But let's look at the second half story. In weeks 1 through 11, he averaged 4.3 yards per carry, 3.0 yards after contact per attempt, and he had a breakaway run percentage of 30.1%. Now looking at the rest of the weeks 12 through 18, 3.4 yards per carry, 2.73 yards after contact per attempt, and a 25.6 breakaway run percentage. Not only do the numbers show it, but on film too, I thought he looked much slower, not explosive, and just it looks like the season grind got to him. It looks like he looked like an older player who, after all the hits in the first half, for all the little injuries he suffered, after all the bruising, all the bashing, it affected him in the second half. It really, really did. It took a toll on him. And in fantasy, he suffered as a result. In weeks 1 through 11, 7 out of 8 games, 16 plus PPR points. But in weeks 12 through 18, 1 out of 6 games, he was 16 plus PPR points. It's just the fresh legs for him ended halfway through the season, and he just kind of dipped. So the age cliff for him could hit. He's approaching his age 30 season. But all depends on ADP. A lot of these players all depends on ADP because cost is everything for these guys, especially guys that are near the top. Cost is going to be everything, but I'm likely not going to be a part of the Joe Mixon fan club next year. I'm likely going to be a little concerned about that age dip, especially since we saw the regression in the second half of the season. We were talking about Derrick Henry earlier in the show. I'm not too concerned about him because I didn't see the regression. I didn't see any regression. He looked like the same guy all year long. Joe Mixon, on the other hand, he was not. So now let's move through this receiving core. Nico Collins, he's a monster at wide receiver. He's a borderline wide receiver 1 in points per game. And with how concerning the Tank Dell injuries are, with Stephon Diggs likely moving on, and the rest of this receiving core not looking too hot, Nico Collins is somebody that is going to be a target earner, a target monster. He's a ridiculously good player. I mean, in the first handful of games before his injury, I think it was 6 games, he was on pace for a 2,000-yard season in a 17-game pace. Monstrous numbers. And I think he's going to continue coming back to that next year when he's fully healthy. And now I mentioned Tank Dell, man. Fractured fibula, gunshot wound, and a blown-up knee, multiple ligament tears. I don't think we're going to see him in 2025 very much. I don't know if we'll see him at all. This is scary for a receiver that is so dependent on speed and athleticism because he's at such a smaller frame. He weighs about 165, 170 pounds, which is about what I weigh. I'm almost that much, which is kind of crazy to think about, a guy my size playing in the NFL. But looking at what he's going to do in the future, it's just like I just said, he's so dependent on speed and athleticism. If you have all these injuries that are very long-term level injuries, where's that speed and athleticism going to go? Last year we saw it dip. It wasn't there as much. He was not as good of a player. And I wouldn't be surprised if after a blown-up knee at the end of this past year, if we continue to see a lack of athleticism. And after a couple of years, he's going to be a free agent looking for a second contract. And if he has a couple bad years, he could quickly work himself out of the league. I'm not even kidding. He could work himself out of the league if he's really not that good for a couple years. we could be saying bye-bye to Tank Dell really quickly. And I'm really concerned about that. I loved Tank Dell last year. I was very in on him, and it just did not work out. And I think I'm bailing. I'm not in on Tank Dell right now, man. I'm sorry. Now let's talk about Dalton Schultz to wrap up the Texans. With Dell and Diggs looking iffy, Dalton Schultz may have a really relevant role in this offense. Just keep an eye on him. He's a really solid tight end. He had success in Dallas, and in the second half, with a lot of injuries for Houston, Schultz had 6 games of 4+ catches throughout the second half of the season, so keep an eye on him. Now let's move on to the Colts. We're going to move a little faster here to wrap up the show. The Colts finished 8-9. Anthony Richardson, this is the big player we got to talk about here for the Colts. He had 2 games this year above 50% completion, just 2. And the problem is I just don't have any faith in Anthony Richardson anymore. I really, really don't, guys. I'm really concerned about him because he has not shown any growth since college. Like, he has not shown any growth. He has not shown anything that is different. He has not shown anything that is truly special. The only thing that he's shown that is truly special is that he can throw the ball 65, 70 yards downfield. That's the only thing he has. Otherwise, I haven't seen anything that proves that he is a special quarterback. I just don't see it. I really, really don't. He misses all the easy throws. He misses a lot of the easy throws, guys. He makes terrible choices with the ball. He's not good at going through his reads. He's one of the league leaders in interception-worthy throws and messy throws and incomplete passes. It's just not there. It really is not there. I'm afraid that he just doesn't have the capability to be a franchise quarterback. I think the Colts will run it back with him this year. They're going to add a veteran competition to, keep up with him, see if he can compete with that player. I don't think it's going to work. I think we're not going to see Anthony Richardson be a franchise quarterback. I don't think we're going to see him be a starter for the Colts after the 2025-26 season. So if you can still get a substantial price for him, Dynasty, I'm selling hard. I'm selling hard. Now, let's talk about the rest of this offense. Jonathan Taylor, he's good at football. Simple as that. You draft him highly in fantasy as a borderline RB1, and he's likely to give you that. He's a really good receiving back when he's needed there. It's just Anthony Richardson doesn't pass him the ball. So, we're going to see some inconsistent receiving usage, but he's still a very good running back that's going to get a lot of red zone opportunity and get a ton of big plays. So, I like Jonathan Taylor a lot. I think he'll be undervalued next year because he's just like old news. He's an older running back, but I think he's going to be undervalued next year because of that. Michael Pittman, wide receiver 41 this year, had a back issue that lingered all this season, and I would say he would bounce back. But you have Josh Downs here, who's a really good wide receiver. He's a really good slot player and earned some serious targets last year, outplayed Michael Pittman by a mile. And Anthony Richardson's not a good quarterback, and I don't believe him at all. So I'm not going to have faith in Michael Pittman, and I'm also not going to have too much faith in Josh Downs, depending on his ADP. If he's going way, way down there because of the concerns about Anthony Richardson, I'll take that price. But if he's going, like how people saw him with Joe Flacco, if he's going at that kind of ADP, I'm out. I'm not interested. So now let's wrap up with arguably the 2 worst teams in the NFL this past year. The Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence, disappointing year overall. Very, very disappointing. He wasn't good when he played. Then he got injured and missed a lot of the season. I'm buying him in Dynasty as a QB2. I think he's worth the buy. He is stuck on that contract. The Jaguars are not getting out of it for a couple more seasons at least. And he could be good because he isn't the Peyton Manning prospect that we want him to be. He isn't the special player that we wanted him to be. I don't think he is. But he's not terrible. He's had 2 top 15 seasons in the last 3 years at fantasy football. And he's looked solid. He's had some promising moments, but he hasn't put it all together yet. Again, like I said, he locked in with a massive contract. So he has a couple years to continue to prove himself. He has the receiving core. He has Evan Ingram. He has Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas Jr. He is amazing. The Jaguars can continue to add. And they also have a solid backfield, which will move swiftly into Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby. I'm going to be honest. Tank Bigsby looked really good this year. But for some reason, they continued to involve Etienne. I think Bigsby outplayed Etienne by a long stretch, by a mile. But Etienne was continued to be worked in, and Tank Bigsby was continued to be basically irrelevant for fantasy. Both of them finish as borderline RB3s in fantasy. If I'm drafting either of these guys next year, it's going to be Bigsby. Bigsby's on the upturn, while Etienne, not so much. Now, Brian Thomas Jr., 1,282 receiving yards, ranked 8th all-time for rookies. Top 6 wide receiver this year in 20-plus yard targets, receptions, and he was top 10 in contested catch percentage as a rookie. Phenomenal rookie season for Brian Thomas Jr. He was one of my favorite players to watch in the NFL this year. Absolutely fantastic. He's a red zone big play touchdown monster. He'll be ranked very highly for me, absolutely in that top 6 conversation. and I'll happily take him at that range in the draft, no matter who the quarterback is for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then we'll end with Evan Ingram. Injuries killed him this season. Injuries absolutely killed him this season. 5 of 8 fully healthy games, went for 10 plus PPR points, though. He was really solid. So if the Jaguars don't add any monstrous players at wide receiver or tight end, Evan Ingram should be a solid option next year. I think he'll be slept on a little bit, too, because he just had a bit of a down year with injuries. Now, wrap it up with the Titans. We're going to talk about Will Levis. Not fantasy relevant this year, and I'm just going to say he's not it. He was basically the meme of the year, honestly, with how many pictures he created. It was absolutely phenomenal to continue to watch those pictures that he created. A lot of great memes from Will Levis. So the question is, I'm going to wrap this up with this. Will the Titans go QB at 1? Will the Titans go QB at 1, or will they pass up and use Levis as a bridge for 2026? I think they use Levis as a bridge. I think they're going to get a big-time defensive player or a big-time offensive lineman to help them out there. And I think they're going to let Levis be a bridge quarterback because the quarterback class here is incredibly weak. I don't think they're going to, or unless a team offers trade number 1 to get a quarterback. If they do that, I think the Titans will happily trade out. I don't think there's going to be a strong demand for quarterback number 1 in this class. I really don't. I don't think Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders are worth it. I think the NFL will see that. I don't think we're going to see these guys go number 1 overall. I think the Titans are going to look different in a different direction number 1 overall, or they're just going to trade out of the pick. And that's going to be it for the first ever episode of Hutch Coming in Clutch. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I know that was a little fast going through all these teams, but that's what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be a quick, nice recap so we can do a little refresh. You know, it's been the NFL playoffs have been going on. The Super Bowl just happened. People kind of forget what happened last year, and I wanted to give a quick refresh of how everything went. We're going to be going through all the divisions over the next few episodes and also do a little bit of free agency previews as well, a little sprinkle of that throughout the episodes. And then when free agency happens, we'll go from there. It's going to be a fun offseason, everybody. Again, thank you all for so much for tuning in, whether on audio or watching my little face here on YouTube. I appreciate you. Make sure you click that subscribe button so you'll be notified every single time a new episode does drop. We'll see you all next week again on Thursday.